Hey Chael, Glenn Bell, Professor Chael. I have a question for you about the business side of fighting, the psychology of it all. Now, hypothetically speaking, let's say we have a fighter who loses his last 2 fights in the UFC. He leaves the promotion, fights in another promotion, comes back to the UFC, and loses again. And then he retires. Now, hypothetically speaking, this fighter wants to come back to the UFC, skip the line, and fight for the belt. He comes to Professor Chael and says, help me do this. Help me go right for that belt. Hypothetically speaking, let's say this fighter's name is Kevin Lee. Kevin Lee comes to you and says, I said I could whip Islam before. I still think I can whip him now. Help me get that fight. Now, here's what we do know. You called yourself and got a title fight with Jon Jones. We know that Stipe and Yo Romero and Masvidal, they got title fights after coming off of a loss. Al Quinta was ranked number 11 and got a title fight, and poor Benny Darush won 8 straight and still didn't get a title fight. So there's no cookie cutters, we know that. Professor Chael has taught us that rankings and records don't matter, and there's no laws, rules, or policies when it comes to that belt. We also know that Kevin Lee's been calling out Islam over half a decade ago, before most of us even knew what a Makhachev was, wanted to fight him in Russia on his home soil. Khabib, back in 2018, called out Kevin Lee for Islam, and Islam accepted that fight. He said, yes, I deserve this fight. I want that fight. He's been trash-talking Russian fighters. I'll smash him. So, what kind of things would you tell Kevin Lee if he came to you? Now, the answer could be, Glenn, that's silly. You just went overboard. That's too hypothetical. Kevin Lee is too far out of it. That would never work. But if that's not your answer, if hypothetically speaking, Kevin Lee came to you, came out of retirement, wanted to fight straight for the belt, what kind of things from the business side, the psychology of the sport, would you tell him? In layman's terms, Chael, as it relates to the UFC's 155-pound belt that Islam has, what does Kevin Lee have to do with all this?
Oh, Glenn, always nice to hear from you. And I appreciate the t-shirt, by the way. Now, you were asking me a colossally difficult question, right? Like, I think I would sound like a little bit of a fool if I made a suggestion to you that I thought would stick. But within your question, I think that you knew you were asking me colossally hard to see how I'm going to handle this. Look, Glenn, the belt changes things, right? I love the point that you brought up that Kevin Lee was willing to fight him before anybody knew what an Islam was. Now, just to clarify that, Kevin knew what an Islam was, and so did the rest of the division. Just to clarify, the division had turned him down, the division had refused him, and Kevin stepped up and said, I'll do it anyway. He had a bad knee, he was supposed to undergo surgery. He said, I'll go to Russia to do it. This wasn't for some kind of attention, because to your point, the masses, he wouldn't get any credit for it. The masses didn't know that all the guys in the back turned him down and were scared of him. It wasn't like that. So, the belt changes things, though. I mean, just to give you a fine example, and we'll use Islam. Benny Darush had the fight. Benny Darush and Islam were booked. And all we've ever been told by Dana White was that Joe Rogan told him, hey, don't do that fight. And I've always been so curious, like, why? What was Joe's thought? What did he not want to say? I've always been curious about that. But I'll tell you what, they didn't do it. And as close as they got was to put Benny in another fight. He'd already beaten 8 guys in a row. But moreover, the point that I want you to understand, he already had that fight. That fight was done. That fight was signed. Whatever happened there. Benny won more fights in between. The difference, Islam had the belt. And so there was just a difference. They were going to main event it. By the way, I mean, it was going to be 5 rounds. It was going to be the last fight of the night. It was going to be the marquee bout. It was going to be all these different things that it would still be, except the belt would be up. And that is what changes. So I love the story that Kevin would tell, right? Because that would be the number one thing that he would have to work around. I didn't ask for the championship. I didn't say I could beat everybody. I didn't even say that I was the best. I said I could beat him. I want to fight him. And that story will always work. Now, you need the wins behind you, and you need the right momentum. You must have the mandate of the masses. There's things that happen, but as far as being monetizable, I want him. Always works more than the belt. I'll give you a fine example, but right now, we have a really great fight to look forward to, which is the return of Stipe Miocic, which is Jon Jones' first title defense. They're doing it at the Mecca. I mean, this is a really big fight, and we all love it. It would be much bigger if they wanted to fight each other. It would be much, much bigger if Jon knew when I came to the heavyweight division I was going to have to be specially prepared, and I took extra time. I knew I would see this man eventually. Like, it would be very different. If Stipe said, I was offended when I heard he was going to come up. When I heard he was going to come up, if I knew it was going to take 3 years, I would have gone down and dealt with him. You don't come see me. It would be much more interesting. But we're coming from a perspective where the story of the fight is in such a desperation mode that there's a consideration being given to make it a retirement fight. Now, in the history of the organization, if somebody announces that they're going to retire, not only have they not been a main event, they've been pulled off of the main card. You will have former world champions who have announced it's their last night. They are pulled off the main card. There would be no reason to shine them up. That is a checkers move in a company that plays chess. If I don't have something that I can build and get an ROI on, that's not the business I'm in. And it's not sincere. Like, they're not about to retire, just so you understand, Glenn. I'm telling you, the story out of desperation is being considered and floated to make it a retirement match. The next day, we'll get up and say, well, they changed their mind. But what are you fighting for? And that's not a skill that Jon doesn't have, by the way. When Jon let loose on Daniel Cormier, that was fascinating stuff. And you could see it in Jon's eyes. You could see it. It was real. Jon has done some promotional work for Francis after it became an impossibility. But it was interesting stuff. Colby Covington has told stories of Jon Jones doing guerrilla stuff back in the day in college. It's interesting. It's very interesting. But it's just not a skill that he loves to possess. There's certain things that has to bring it out of him. There's nothing that we can do to change that. And I only am using this as an example to let you know, like, Kevin wouldn't be without argument, particularly if Islam felt a certain way. If Islam felt like he owed him. I mean, where I'm telling you that Kevin could say, I don't care about the belt and I never have. I care about him. I came after him. I've never even asked for the belt. That's a byproduct. As much as Kevin could do that, and you think that wouldn't hold up, the surprise you might have is Islam would agree. I don't care about it either. Let's fight. Right? If he thought it was interesting, if you insult him the right way, if he thought he could get the right credit, if he thought it would please his people, his team, Khabib. But that's not the situation. There is a belt. And when there's a belt, the rules change.